Have you ever felt like no matter how much careful planning goes into society, or even on the flip side, like how completely free we let the markets be, things still just feel fundamentally flawed?
Oh, absolutely. Like there's a persistent bug in the code.
Right, a bug in the code of how we organize ourselves that we just cannot seem to patch. But, I mean, what if the problem isn't how we are thinking? Or, what specific economic model we happen to be using?
Well, that's the real question.
Exactly. What if the bug is the very fact that we are relying on human rationality at all?
It is an incredibly disruptive question. I mean, we generally treat human rationality as our ultimate tool, right?
Oh, yeah, the thing that separates us from animals.
Exactly. The defining characteristic that elevates us and allows us to build complex civilizations.
Mm,
So to suggest that rationality itself is the bug in the code, that completely flips our standard worldview upside down.
it really does. And that is exactly what we are getting into today. Welcome to the Deep Dive. I'm your host, and today we're unpacking a June 2024 essay by an author named Xu Feng.
And I'm thrilled to be here to help break this down.
Yeah, we're glad to have you. So the essay is titled Critique of Rational Thinking, and it makes exactly that wild claim we just talked about. He argues that our most prized possession, like our rational mind, is actually the biggest roadblock preventing humanity from entering a truly civilized society.
Which is quite a statement.
It is. And just as a quick note for you listening, we're not here to endorse Xu Feng's politics or spirituality one way or the other.
Right. Our goal is just to explore the ideas impartially.
Yeah, we're simply unpacking the logic of how he gets from point A to point B. Because the journey he takes through economic theory and social organization is genuinely thought-provoking.
It really is. And the foundation of his argument starts by drawing a really sharp line between two different operating systems for human beings.
Okay, lay it out for us.
So on one side, you have the way the vast majority of people function, which the text describes as purely instinctual.
Yeah, instinctual, like survival mode.
Basically, yeah. The author defines this instinct as a relentless, almost biological focus on survival and accumulation, chasing wealth, chasing power, reputation, status.
Right.
It is the default animal setting.
Which leaves the other side, which is rational thinking. And Xu Feng defines this clearly, too. It is the process of gathering a large number of facts, observing them, analyzing them, finding patterns.
Right, putting the pieces together.
Exactly. And from there, you abstract those patterns to solve problems and figure out a direction to go.
And the essay does acknowledge that this is advanced thinking. It is the domain of what the author calls the wise, the philosophers, the scientists, the policymakers.
The people running the show.
Exactly. But here is the major pivot of the essay. He says neither the instinct of the masses nor the rationality of the wise will ever lead us to a highly civilized society.
Wow.
Yeah. The instinctual approach is too materialistic and selfish, which, I mean, that's fairly intuitive.
Sure, we see that every day.
Right. But the author goes a step further and argues that the thinking of the wise is actually too rational, and that rationality is inherently a trap.
Okay, let's unpack this, because that sounds completely counterintuitive to me. How can observing facts and solving problems be a trap?
Because human rationality, by its very biological and psychological nature, is just fundamentally limited.
Limited how?
Well, no matter how objective a person tries to be, their understanding of the vast, interconnected world is always going to fall short. The author uses a traditional analogy to explain this. He describes human understanding as being like viewing a leopard through a narrow tube.
Oh, a leopard through a tube. Okay, so if you were looking at a leopard through a narrow tube, you might see a bright patch of yellow fur. Or maybe you just see a single black spot.
Exactly.
And that one spot is a fact. It is undeniably real and true. But because your vision is restricted to that tiny circle, you entirely neglect the rest of the animal. You miss the teeth, the claws, the muscles, the environment that the leopard is hunting in.
And mistaking that single black spot for the entirety of the animal is where the danger really lies. Because of this limitation, the text argues that relying on human intelligence alone cannot establish a functional, civilized society. We're just physically and mentally incapable of seeing the entire leopard.
I was trying to conceptualize this in a modern context, actually.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it feels like rational thinking is akin to trying to navigate a massive, incredibly complex city in the dead of night using only a pocket flashlight.
Oh, that's a great way to put it.
Right, like you can clearly see the 3 feet of sidewalk directly in front of you. You can avoid stepping in a pothole. You can read a street sign.
Sure.
But you are entirely blind to the overarching map of the city. You cannot see the traffic jams forming 5 miles away, or the failing power grid, or the construction zones.
And when you try to direct that city's traffic without seeing the whole map, you don't just fail to help, you actively cause pileups. That is why Swefeng argues that the harder a government pushes a master plan based on rational thinking, the more catastrophic the disaster becomes.
Because they're just guessing based on what the flashlight shows them.
Exactly. When policymakers use their narrow flashlight beam to design an entire economy, they enforce a system based on incredibly incomplete data.
Wait, so the argument is that massive societal planning fails,
Yeah.
not necessarily because of bad intentions or, political corruption or a lack of resources, but simply because we literally lack the raw processing power to handle all the variables.
That is the uncompromising stance of the text. Yes.
That is wild.
We cannot rely on human intelligence for societal design because we cannot grasp what the author calls the universal interconnectedness of things.
Universal interconnectedness.
Right. And Swefeng provides a very specific numerical claim here, which is fascinating. He states that this universal interconnectedness involves exactly 64 factors.
Wait, really? That is a highly specific, almost mathematical assertion. What do those 64 factors even represent?
Well, the essay doesn't list out a literal spreadsheet of 64 items, but the number is used to symbolize the absolute staggering totality of cause and effect in the universe.
Okay, so it's a stand-in for just everything.
Exactly. Think of it as the ultimate web of variables. Global supply chains, historical grievances, shifting weather patterns, human psychological moods.
Unpredictable stuff.
Yeah, sudden technological innovations, resource depletion, and even spiritual elements, according to the author.
Wow.
The point is that human rationality might be able to juggle, say, 10 of these factors simultaneously, maybe 15 on a really good day, but it can never account for all 64 at once.
And when you miss the other 50 factors, your plan completely falls apart.
Exactly. And to illustrate the sheer impossibility of this, the author points to physics. Yeah. He compares social planners to scientists attempting to establish a unified field theory of the universe. The text claims this attempt is doomed to fail because conventional science currently only acknowledges 4 types of fundamental forces while completely ignoring the other 4 that the author believes exist.
Oh, wow. So it is not even that our math is wrong. It is that half of the equation is completely invisible to us.
Right.
We are trying to build a bridge while only acknowledging gravity and just totally ignoring wind and friction.
And Shefeng brings this sweeping concept all the way down to the individual level to prove his point. He notes that humans, even the absolute smartest among us, do not even know for certain what will happen tomorrow in our own personal lives.
That's entirely fair.
So his logic is, if we cannot predict our own tomorrow with absolute certainty, how can any group of planners possibly have the hubris to rationally design an entire economy for millions of people over a span of decades?
I mean, it really forces a perspective shift. It really does. So if our flashlight of rationality is simply too weak to plan an economy, the natural instinct is to just drop the flashlight entirely and let the free market take the wheel, right?
And Shefeng acknowledges this pivot. He points directly at the foundations of classical liberalism and capitalism as the only rational alternative to planning.
Right.
The transition in his logic here is really essential. Since planned economies fail due to our cognitive limits, the text evaluates the market alternative. It breaks down the historical and economic assertions that underpin property rights.
Oh, okay.
The essay actually brings in John Locke.
Right. The guy who famously identified life, liberty, and property as the foundational elements of natural human rights.
Exactly.
Which is the bedrock of Western economic thought, the idea that you own yourself and therefore you own the fruits of your labor.
The author also references the economist Friedrich Hayek, noting his belief that property rights are the absolute core of market order and individual freedom.
Right. Yep.
And this connects beautifully back to your flashlight analogy.
Oh, really? How so?
Well, Hayek's whole argument against central planning was the knowledge problem. He believed that knowledge in society is dispersed. No single planner can know everything.
Because they can't see the whole city map.
Exactly. Therefore, the only way a society can function is if individuals are given secure property rights, allowing them to make their own localized decisions based on the tiny beam of light they can see.
Right. They don't need to know how the whole city works. They just need to manage their own small house and trade with their neighbors.
Precisely how the theory goes. And the author points out that the primary reason countries like the UK and the USA became highly developed and incredibly powerful is specifically because they built their legal systems around this concept.
Property rights above all.
Yes, they legally guaranteed the sanctity and inviolability of private property. They stopped trying to plan the city and instead just built strong fences.
I love that. And there's a really vivid quote the author includes here to describe just how sacred those fences are in these systems.
Okay.
It describes a simple thatched cottage and says, let me get it right. The wind can enter, the rain can enter, but the king cannot enter.
It is such a striking image. It perfectly encapsulates the idea that no matter how humble your property is, no matter how powerful the state or the monarch is, your ownership is an absolute impenetrable barrier.
The king is locked out.
Yeah. And Suveng applies this very traditional concept to the modern day, stating that ensuring the property of someone like Elon Musk remains inviolable is actually a blessing for the entire human society.
A blessing. Wow. But this brings us to a massive dilemma in the text, because I'm reading this, and Shifeng is fiercely defending property rights.
He really is.
He is saying that infringing on legitimate private property is absolutely wrong under any pretext. The text even explicitly says the pursuit of utopian, centrally planned, ideal societies will inevitably cause disasters. But then, almost in the same breath, he argues that property rights cannot be the ultimate legal principle if we actually want to elevate humanity to a civilized state. So how do we resolve this paradox? He says property is sacred, but also, totally insufficient.
It is an agonizing tightrope to walk, and it is the central conflict of the entire essay. So let's untangle it.
Please do.
Schweffing concedes that capitalism, rooted in the sanctity of private property, is the absolute best system human rationality can ever come up with.
Because of the flashlight problem.
Exactly. Because of our limited ability to juggle those 64 factors, decentralized property rights are the peak of our capability.
But the peak of our human capability isn't actually good enough to solve the root problem.
Bingo. Because the text argues that the sanctity of private property entirely fails to meet the psychological needs of the proletariat.
And just to clarify, in this context, the author uses proletariat to mean the everyday working class, right?
Right, the masses of people who lack massive capital, who rely on their daily labor to survive, and who often get ground down by the sheer friction of a highly competitive system.
So if you just rely purely on the free market,
Hmm.
what we call the invisible hand Truefeng argues we just end up returning to a jungle society.
Yes, a jungle society.
A reality where the strong prey on the weak. Sure, the king cannot enter your thatched cottage, but what happens when a massive corporation buys all the land around your cottage and starves you out?
Exactly.
The fences protect what you own, but they also allow the strongest predators to accumulate the most territory.
And that is why it fails the standard of what the text calls the heavenly kingdom. So we are trapped in a sociological dead end.
Total catch-22.
Yeah. If we try to rationally plan a compassionate society to help the weak, our limited minds fail, we ignore half the variables, and we create a rigid, catastrophic disaster.
Sure.
But if we abandon planning, protect property, and let the market run free, we create a brutal jungle where instinct, materialism, and predation dominate.
So human rationality cannot build a utopia, but human instinct naturally creates a jungle.
You nailed it.
Man, here's where it gets really interesting, though, because the essay takes a pretty unexpected turn here. Hufeng doesn't just throw his hands up and say humanity is doomed.
No, he doesn't.
He agrees that the tightrope is impossible for humans to walk. So his solution is to entirely abandon both rationality and the market.
Which forces us to ask a really weird question. Can humanity actually enter a higher state of civilization by dropping our defining characteristic of rationality completely?
And the author's answer is a resounding yes. But the method requires a complete paradigm shift.
A massive one.
I mean, we go from the grounded economic theories of Locke and Hayek straight into the concept of copying a spiritual blueprint. The author literally uses the phrase copy and pasting.
Yeah, the text introduces the concept of the heavenly life mechanism.
The heavenly life mechanism.
Right. The logic is that since human rationality cannot design an ideal social system with our limited wisdom, the solution is not to invent a new system from scratch. The solution is to copy an existing, perfectly balanced one.
Wait, practically speaking, what does that actually mean?
Sure.
You can't just hit Ctrl plus C on a spiritual realm.
Right.
How does an actual group of people manifest a heavenly blueprint on the ground without someone, somewhere, making a rational plan, or managing property.
It sounds impossible, but the text provides a specific, real-world example of this being attempted.
Really?
Yeah, it points to the second home, created by a community concept called Lifechanyuan.
Okay.
The essay describes this second home as a direct, copied model of the production and living style of the thousand-year world of the heavenly kingdom.
But how does a second home physically function without a market or a planner, like day to day?
According to the source, it operates by entirely removing traditional property ownership and the concept of the nuclear family's private accumulation.
So no thatched cottages.
No thatched cottages. Instead of a planner dictating who gets what or a market forcing people to compete for resources, the community relies on voluntary, spontaneous participation and the pooling of all resources.
Oh, wow. So it bypasses the planner's coercion and it bypasses the market's predation.
That is the exact goal. This copying model is explicitly designed to do two things simultaneously.
Okay, what are they?
First, to completely avoid human rational intervention, meaning there is no central committee of planners sitting in a room trying to arrogantly juggle the 64 factors of the universe.
Right, because they can't.
Exactly. The system relies on natural flow rather than rigid design.
Okay, and the second thing?
Second, it bypasses the jungle law mechanism of the animal world, meaning there's no pure free market where the strong devour the weak for profit.
It is essentially trying to emulate the balance of nature, but without the food chain.
That's a great analogy.
Like a forest where all the trees share the root system and nutrients, rather than competing for the sunlight?
Yes. And by doing so, the author argues that the psychological needs of the proletariat, the need for security, peace, and freedom from the relentless daily grind of survival, are finally met.
It is presented as a third way that entirely transcends human rational capability.
It really is.
It really makes you sit back and look at the whole architecture of this essay. I mean, we started by looking through that narrow tube, realizing how restricted our rational minds actually are when trying to comprehend reality.
Just seeing that single black spot.
Exactly. We explored the idea that the universe operates on 64 deeply interconnected factors, and that trying to forcefully plan a society without knowing them all is like trying to unify physics while ignoring half the fundamental forces.
It's guaranteed to fail.
Right. Then we walked that impossible tightrope between the sanctity of a thatched cottage and the brutality of a free market jungle. And finally, we arrived at this radical second home concept. The idea that the only way to win the game of civilization is to stop playing by human rules entirely and simply copy a blueprint that doesn't rely on our flawed processing power.
It's a journey. And, if we bring this abstract theory directly down to the ground for you listening right now, there is a very practical takeaway here, regardless of how you view Sweffing's spiritual solutions or communal models.
Yeah. How does this apply to everyday life?
Well, whether you are trying to perfectly plan out your schedule for the next quarter, or you are strategizing a complex move for your business, this text serves as a deeply humbling reminder of our own limits.
We only have a pocket flashlight.
Exactly. There are always hidden variables. There are always factors in that 64-piece puzzle of reality that we just cannot foresee from our limited perspective. It forces us to question our own absolute certainty when we make grand plans for our lives or our organizations.
It absolutely does. And it leaves me with a thought to mull over, actually. Something that builds directly on Sweffing's premise, but takes it into our immediate technological future.
Oh, I'm intrigued.
So the author argues that human rationality is fundamentally too limited to juggle the countless factors of society, which forces us to rely on a heavenly blueprint to avoid disaster. But what happens when we introduce artificial intelligence into the mix?
Oh, wow.
Right. If the core problem is a biological lack of processing power, the inability of the human brain to see all 64 factors of the universe at once, could an advanced AI theoretically solve the author's problem?
That is a fascinating question.
Could a machine intellect, unburdened by human survival instincts and capable of processing millions of interconnected variables in real time, actually map out the whole city and plan the perfect economy?
Instead of a heavenly blueprint, a digital one.
Exactly. Or, by removing the heavenly or human element entirely, would an AI-designed society just trap us in a completely different, highly optimized, and terrifyingly efficient kind of jungle?
That's a little scary to think about.
It is. Just how far does the narrow tube of rationality really go when the flashlight is no longer held by a human?
Something for all of us to think about.